as well too, so I think it would actually be well worthwhile to bring that information back. I would also say that I promised to do a delegates report. I did do a delegates report for the last representation that I made on council's behalf. It was in the right amount of time, and you may ask the Director of Infrastructure why it wasn't in this month's meeting, but indeed I did one.
Councillor O'Keefe, would you like to speak to the motion?
I'm unsure if I'm speaking to it or asking a question, so I'll just misbehave in general for your benefit, Mr Mayor, but I have some sympathy with Councillor Hoddle's point around needing to understand the economic benefit of attending these conferences, and I'm racking my brain, but I don't think since the reconvention of this council we've had a workshop or a positioning discussion as a new elected body on the value of tourism to our economy and what our current strategies are in terms of promoting that to the Shire. So maybe as a note for the General Manager that we could talk to the responsible director and get that on our agenda for a future Wednesday and actually start to unpick what our council's current strategy in this space is.
I don't know if this is a point of order, maybe. There was a workshop specifically about agritourism. Nikki presented it. And you did not attend.
Councillor Fuller, councillors, Councillor Fuller, as the mover of the motion, would you like a right of reply?
No, thank you, Mr Mayor.
Being the case, then, councillors, I'm going to put this motion. All in favour? Against? Declare the motion carried. Last item for our Director of Corporate Community Services, and that's 10.10, Outstanding Resolution Register, and I'll hand back to Ms Didworthy to detail that recommendation.
Thank you, and through you, Mr Mayor, this is a standing item in relation to outstanding council resolutions and actions taken, giving a status update as to where they're up to. Thank you.
Thank you, and I'll now call for elected member to move the recommendation. Councillor Hook, seconded by Councillor Moses. Councillor Hook, do you wish to speak to the motion?
Once again, no, thank you, Mr Mayor.
I'll now open to the floor for any questions or comments in relation to the item. Councillor Moses is a seconder to the motion. Do you wish to speak to it?
No, thank you, Mr Mayor.
Be the case, I'll put the motion. All in favour? Against? Declare the motion carried. And Ms Didworthy, thank you very much for your contribution to your very first Gunnedah Shire Ordinary Meeting of Council. There'll be many more. We're now moving on to item 11, which is a Director of Planning and Environmental Services reports. I'll call on Mr Johns to detail his recommendation, starting with item 11.1, Access Working Group Nomination.
Thanks, Mr Mayor, and through you, councillors. This report seeks council endorsement of Jasmine Alloway being appointed to the Access Working Group as a community representative.
Thank you, Mr Johns. I'll now call for a mover of that motion, and I think that's Councillor McGrath has her hand in the air, so I'll take that as moving the motion. And seconder, Councillor Fuller. Councillor McGrath, do you wish to speak to the motion as mover?
No, thank you, Mr Mayor.
Have an elected member who'd like to ask a question or speak against this motion? Councillor Fuller is a second to the motion. Do you wish to speak?
No, thanks, Mr Mayor.
Be the case, I'll put the motion. All in favour? Aye. Against? Declare that motion carried. Next, we have item 11.2, which is Community Safety Conference Working Group nomination. I'll hand back to Mr John to detail that recommendation.
Thanks, Mr Mayor, and through you, councillors. This report, similar to the last one, seeks endorsement of Mrs Rayleigh Bruce as a member of the Community Safety Conference Working Group.
Thank you, Mr Johns. That is moved by Councillor Fuller and seconded by Councillor Moses. Councillor Fuller, as a move of the motion, do you wish to speak to the motion?
No, thank you, Mr Mayor.
Do I have an elected member who'd like to speak against this motion or ask a question? Councillor Moses is a seconder. Do you wish to speak to it?
No, thank you, Mr Mayor.
Being the case, then, I'll put this motion. All in favour? Against? Declare the motion carried. Councillor Fuller, would you mind turning your microphone off, please? Thank you. Next item, 11.3, which is Gunnedah Housing Working Group nominations, and I'll hand back to Mr Johns.
Thanks, Mr Mayor, and through you, at the risk of sounding repetitive, councillors, though it is good to get lots of community representation on our various working groups, but this report seeks the endorsement of 4 representatives from the community as they're outlined in the report to the Gunnedah Shire Housing Working Group.
Thank you, Mr Johns. I'll now call for a mover. Thank you, Councillor Hook, seconded by Councillor MacArthur. Councillor Hook, as a move of the motion, do you wish to speak?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Only briefly, those 4 people who have been nominated are going to be a great asset to the working group, and looking forward to working with them.
I'll now call for elected member who'd like to speak against this motion or ask a question. Councillor McCarthy, second of the motion, do you wish to speak?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. To echo Councillor Hook's remarks about the people who are nominated, and to say looking forward to some real working strategies, because we have a housing crisis in Gunnedah that really needs to be addressed in a sustainable way. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any further questions or comments, councillors, before I put this motion? No? Be the case, then I'll put the motion. All in favour? Against? I'll declare that motion carried. Councillors, I have a declaration of interest for this next item, 11.4, which is a Section 356 Community and Small Grants Small Grant Panel outcome. I also believe Councillor Fuller and Councillor McGrath have declarations that they will also be leaving the chambers. So now I'll be handing to the Deputy Mayor, and he will be guiding you through this item for debate. Thank you.
Thank you, councillors, and let the record show that the Mayor has left the chambers for this particular item. 11.4, 2022-23, Section 356, Community and Small Sports Grants Panel Outcome. And I'll hand over to Mr Johns to outline the recommendation.
Thanks, Mr Deputy Mayor, and through you, councillors, this report seeks endorsement of the recommendations of the Section 356 Advisory Group in allocation of funds as outlined within the report. I guess, interestingly, we were undersubscribed, which is unusual in this round, so it's also proposed in a resolution sought that a second round of grants be offered to the community.
Thank you very much, Mr Johns. Do I have a mover? Thank you, Councillor Luke, and a seconder, Councillor Moses. Councillor Luke, do you wish to speak to the motion?
Thank you, Mr Deputy Mayor. I think that the people that actually sort of sit on these committees always do a thorough job, so I am happy to support their recommendations.
Thank you very much. Do I have anybody who wishes to ask a question or oppose the motion? Councillor Moses, as seconder of the motion, do you wish to speak?
No, thank you, Mr Deputy Mayor.
Well, thank you very much. So as a member of the panel, I'd just like to sort of add a little bit to the reason why it was undersubscribed. The community sections of these small grants, there was a number of proponents there who either didn't meet the criteria or inadvertently or otherwise didn't give full disclosure of what they were actually seeking. So that's why in the last part of the recommendation it is that they can reapply provided they meet all the recommendations. So having said that, I'll now put the motion. All those in favour? Against? I call the motion carried. And can we ask the Mayor to return to chambers? Oh, and the others. We've got a few out there. I forgot about them. Come on, back you come. So let the record show that those 3 councillors have returned to chambers. And I'll hand back to the Mayor to do an excellent job for the remainder of the meeting.
Thank you, councillors. We'll now move on to our next item, which is 11.5, Draft Policy, Management of Feral and/or Infant Animals, and I'll hand back to Mr Johns.
Thanks, Mr Mayor, and through you, councillors, as you would have read in this report seeks endorsement for exhibition of the Draft Management of Feral and/or Infant Animals Policy for a period of 28 days, and further that should we receive no submissions from the community, that the policy becomes adopted at the cessation of the exhibition period.
Thank you, Mr Johns. Councillor Luke has moved that motion. Councillor Moses has seconded the motion. Councillor Luke as mover, do you wish to speak to it?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. In my professional life and work, this is a huge problem. There are certainly constraints constraints that are actually put on council and its officers to undertake the work that they have to do with those constraints. Very, very difficult, especially in relation to feral cats. So I think that this policy is a good one to actually sort of make everybody's life a bit easier and still fit in with the requirements that are placed upon us by the state government.
Thank you, Councillor Luke. Do I have an elected member who'd like to speak against the motion? Councillor Moses, the second of the motion. Do you wish to speak?
I just want to echo what Councillor Luke said with feral animals around this town. It's disgusting.
Well, councillors, if there's no further debate, I'll put this motion. All in favour? Against? Declare that motion carried. And thank you, Mr. Johns, for your contribution. We'll now move on to item 12, which is Director of Infrastructure Services report now that we pulled one forward. And I'll ask Mr. Bartlett to detail the recommendation in item 12.1, Woolshed Reserve, proposed off-leash dog park.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The purpose of this report is to provide council options for providing a fenced off-leash area in the Woolshed Reserve.
Thank you, Mr. Bartlett. Council, as you'll see, the recommendation is there's two options, option A and option B. So I'll now call for an elected member to put something forward. Councillor Hoddle.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to put forward option B because this $200,000 fence, if it was constructed on an area that didn't flood, would...
Before you debate, Councillor Hoddle, I'll just call for a seconder to that motion, option B. Thank you. Councillor Fuller has seconded. You may now speak to the motion.
$200,000 for a fence that can be pulled down in a flood and potentially damaged anyway. If some logs came through in the flood where that is, you could do the fence for under $10,000 in an area which would be quite suitable for dogs. I'm not against the idea of dog leash walking areas at all, but it's ridiculous to spend this amount of money. Let's look for another site, and option B gives us that idea, the idea behind that. Thank you.
I'll now call for elected member who'd like to speak against this motion or ask a further question. Councillor O'Keefe.
Just note, for the benefit of fellow elected members, I think this is the 5th time we've deferred deciding on where a dog off-leash area will be in my time on council.
I guess I'll take that as a statement, not speaking for or against it. So I will now call for an elected member who'd like to speak against the motion. Councillor Fuller is the seconder to the motion. Do you wish to speak to it?
I totally support Councillor Hoddle's on option 2. I think there are other places, and we know where there's some places, Councillor Hook and I think a couple of other councillors went looking around town, and we've found a space that I think might suit Councillor Luke.
So just to clarify, Councillor Fuller, you're saying option B, not option 2? Option B?
Thank you.
Thank you. Elected members, are there any further questions or comments? Councillor Luke.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I don't think a fenced off-leash area dog park needs to be down on the Woolshed Reserve. I think it just needs to be done quickly. This item is long been on the list of outstanding resolutions. Really as Councillor Hoddle said, we could actually get one tomorrow if we can actually, for only $10,000, if we can decide on a site. We did have to wait a long time for the open space strategy. So I think it's been since 2016 that this resolution has been sitting on the books. So I think I'm happy with option B, and perhaps we can, get that happening ASAP. And can I ask the officer whether there is some funds at all in the budget to create an enclosed off-leash dog park?
Thank you, Councillor Luke, for the question, and through you, Mr. Mayor, no, there are no funds in the current budget allocated for that purpose.
Councillors, any further questions or comments? At the moment, I have not had a speaker against it, so I won't afford Councillor Hoddle the opportunity for a right of reply unless there is one.
No, thanks, Mr Mayor.
Good. So that be the case, then I'll put the motion. All in favour? Against? Declare the motion carried. Right, we'll now move on to item 13, which is reports to committees. We have one with item 13.1, Planning, Environmental and Development Committee meeting report that was held on Wednesday the 6th of July. I'll now call for an elected member to please move the recommendation or that is true and correct record of that event. Thank you, Councillor Moses, seconded by Councillor McGrath. Councillor Moses, as a member of the motion, do you wish to speak?
No, thank you, Mr Mayor.
I have an elected member who'd like to speak against this motion or ask a question. Councillor McGrath, as a second of the motion, do you wish to speak?
No, thank you, Mr Mayor.
Be the case, I'll put the motion. All in favour? Against? Declare the motion carried. Next item, there are no delegates' reports, so we have the next item being item 15, notice of motion or question on notice. We have one, and that is from Councillor Hook, and it reads, notice of motion strategy identifies and prioritises drainage infrastructure upgrades. So before I ask Councillor Hook to speak to this motion, I will just read out his notice of motion. That a strategy be developed and presented to a future council meeting for consideration that identifies and prioritises drainage infrastructure upgrades at locations where natural drainage paths cross the unsealed road network to minimise the whole of life costs of these assets. So that is moved by Councillor Hook. I'll call for a seconder to that notice of motion. Thank you, Councillor Hoddle. And now, Councillor Hook, as that generator of that notice of motion, do you wish to speak to it?
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and yes, it gives me great pleasure to put this motion for consideration for councillors. I think we're all aware that staff work extremely hard with the limited budget they have to do the best job possible in delivering a good road network within this shire. Having travelled through a number of shires, especially in the Southern Highlands area, I find that their road network is absolutely appalling compared to ours. But having said that, the mode of a number of improvements that have actually been conducted and made to actually deliver a better road system through changing the practices of how we actually deliver good secondary roads and especially gravel road network. These changes are seeing a sort of a cyclical improvement in the roads and the benefits that will actually come within the future. And these benefits have not yet been fully realised. These changes are making a big difference and they're already being well received within the Shire, but more actually needs to be done. The staff have actually identified that there's some natural drainage throughout the Shire that goes across our rural roads and especially those roads that are not bitumened. And the way to overcome serious deterioration with washouts and flood events is to put in culverts and causeways and to identify and prioritise these particular areas of pinch points in the road structure. Not only will it say to our ratepayers that the Shire is thinking ahead, the Shire is prioritising and identifying the problems that exist within our road network and flagging to the community that we have a strategic plan with budget availability to actually go ahead and improve these road networks. So that's one benefit, the social benefit that we're actually doing something, because a lot of the ratepayers really think that council is sitting on its hands and not doing very much, and council is doing as much as it possibly can within the budget it has. But I think more importantly than that is that if these areas where there is natural drainage across the roads, we put in culverts and causeways, it will actually improve the life of these particular assets and reduce the cost involved in servicing these particular assets and bringing them back into serviceable life. So with that in mind, I submit this recommendation for council to consider. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hook. Do I have an elected member who'd like to speak against this notice of motion or ask a question maybe? Councillor McGrath.
I just want to be very clear that I am only asking a question to the Director of Infrastructure. Can I just confirm whether this aligns with the information you'd provided in the last workshop?
Thank you, Councillor McGrath, for the question, and through you, Mr Mayor. Yes, it does.
Excellent, thank you.
Councillor Hoddle, as a seconder to the motion, do you wish to speak to it?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'd like to endorse what Councillor Hook said, and I congratulate the engineering department for what they're doing. I can see when I go around some of these dirt roads the effect of crowning roads to get water to run off and crushing the gravel at the site rather than on the road has been done on the past, and having these three gangs working consistently around the area. I know people get very upset if they're on a dirt road and they don't get anything done. I've been there myself. Particularly with this culvert thing, at least it'll give us a prioritisation of work that needs to be done. We've received quite a lot of complaints about the Trinky State Road through to Tampa Springs. And the big issue there is around Cox's Creek. It's not the bridge, but it's either side. And once the Cox's Creek comes up, it tears across the road and takes all the gravel. So if we had a concrete culvert in that sort of situation, it will save the council a lot of money because you're not going to have to replace it all the time. It will appease the ratepayers because they see that council's actually doing a job for them. And I think this is a terrific idea to prioritise what works needs to be done. I fully endorse it and hope the council will support it. Thank you.
Thank you. Do I have an elected member who'd like to ask a further question or speak against the motion? If there's no further debate, councillors, I'll put the motion. All in favour? Aye. Against? I declare that unanimously supported. Thank you, Councillor Hook, for bringing that forward. Councillors, we have one item for closed, so I must ask this question. Are there any reasons why anyone believes the agendaed item should not be determined in closed meeting? No? Would that be the case, then I'd like to request that a councillor moves a motion that we move into closed meeting of council to determine items of a confidential nature, and that was moved by Councillor Hook and seconded by Councillor O'Keefe. And I'll now put that motion. All in favour? I saw your hand waving around. All in favour? Against? Motion carried. We will be suspending, for those listening online, we will be suspending